Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Troy Guevara, and I'd like to welcome you to our Sage 300 CRE year-end training. I have with me today Greg Lane, one of our senior Sage 300 CRE reps.
All right, good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about a couple of topics. One is our government reporting. Again, we're at year end, so we need to prepare for W-2s, 1099s, things like that. So we're going to be going through that. We're going to be talking about our year-end release. When do you require to install it versus when can you put it off? Your payroll tax uploads or downloads. And then we're going to go through some year-end closing procedures, some orders of things, and some of the common things that you need to look at when you're doing your year-end procedures. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing is some topics for discussion or year-end guide, okay? In our PowerPoint, so you'll see there's this topic. If I go to this link, we have quite a few things. For instance, year-end activities, if I want to click on that link, okay? How do I use year-end software release for Sage 300? Right now, okay, an upgrade will be available for 2023, okay? They've said that it will be here sometime in December, okay? So this will be available. And then there's preparing to install and things like that, so different checklists. And I'm not going to go through each one of these in detail because we're going to cover some of the questions that are being asked or talked about right here as to when we install this, okay? And the effects of holding it off or not, okay? Back over here, if I've got some other things, there's quite a few year-end activity topics. You can click on that link, okay? How do I close fiscal year in GL, close year in accounts receivable, close a year in 1099, all kinds of good links. All right. You have some checklist timelines here, okay? When is it a good order to do these things? Okay. And again, these are all things that we're going to be discussing here in this webinar. So be sure you take advantage of that. Troy, I'm not sure if this PowerPoint deck is being made available, but we do have these links within it, or maybe we can get this copy to you. It
will be.
It will be? Okay.
Yeah,
so these links
to the recording as it comes over.
All right. Affordable Care Act, there's a link for that. Goes into some discussion topics about the Affordable Care Act. If I'm looking at Sage 300 construction and real estate, it's going to walk through, and again, we're going to talk about some of these things when we're dealing with this Affordable Care Act here in this webinar, okay? But there is more detailed information through these topics, including any COVID-19 legislation, okay? Families First, CARES, miscellaneous, okay? All right. Then we're going to be talking about our steps to prepare for year-end closing, software, when do I need to install the year-end update. So our topics for discussion, payroll. When do I need to install my tax updates? All right, so the first thing is the tax updates can be installed after your final check of the year and prior to the first check of 2024, okay? You need to make sure your tax updates are installed at that point, okay? So again, after your final check of 2023 and prior to your first check of 2024. When we're doing that, we're just using this tools, and I'm going to go to download taxes. And when I do that, I'm going to go ahead and say, update my tax files when download is complete. And I'm going to hit my start button. It's going to prompt me, if I've got this, just giving me a little printout that's going to tell me that I was successful in downloading my taxes. Doesn't take very long to do this. It's pretty quick. And then once this download is complete, we're going to verify whether or not I have the correct tax files in place for the new year. And to do that, I'm going to go to Setup, Taxes, Tax Rates. One of the main tax IDs that typically has a tax rate change is your federal withholding. So I'm looking to see what the effective date is. Sage will stamp that with 2024. Okay. Right now, they do not have the latest tax tables in place. So when they do get it in place and I run that download, I want to check my federal withholding tax rate setup, make sure it says 1/1/2024. That's my indicator that I have the most recent tax updates in place. Okay. Now, since we're on the topics of my tax rate changes, tax tables, one of the things that you are responsible for is your state employer taxes. Okay? That typically is related to your state unemployment. Now, some states have additional employer-related tax rates, okay? But all of them, or most of them, will have a state unemployment. It is your responsibility to maintain those tax rates, okay? This is company specific. So if you're doing work in Alabama, you're going to have to come in and update your tax percent yourself. That is company specific. Sage does not maintain those for you. We maintain all of our tax rates at the federal level, and Sage maintains all of the tax rates for state employee taxes, withholding. State employer taxes, that is your responsibility to update the rate. Okay. A couple of other places that is your responsibility to update rates is workers' comp. So if I look at my fringes, my workers' comp rates are my responsibility. Okay, there's nothing automatic on that. So don't forget to check that. First payroll of the year, make sure you have the right tax rates in place. Make sure you change your state employer tax rates and update your comp rates in any other applicable ones that you need to start the 2024 year. Okay? So, check back periodically. I don't know if Sage is going to be sending out a notice. I don't get those. Troy, you may be able to answer this. That lets the users know that the latest tax tables are available.
Yes, I was told they would be out sometime in the next week.
Okay. All right. Now, as far as a year-end update, and there's a version 23.2. That's the latest version out there right now. Okay. So the versions that are supported are 18x to 20.5 to 23.2. If you're wanting to know if your environment's able to handle the new upgrade, there's a KB article, 115391. It talks about system requirements. Okay. When you're talking about year-end updates, is it necessary to install this in order to go ahead and run 2024 day-to-day activity? And the answer is no. Okay. The year-end update is required prior to generating W-2s and 1099s. So your year-end update picks up any government mandated form change. Okay. It has no impact on your day-to-day processing. So I don't need to have that year-end update in place by December 31st. I just need to have a year-end update in place before I do 1099s and my W-2s. Okay. Here are some different things to look for. Make sure you are backing up your data files prior to doing any upgrade. Reboot any server and workstations prior to installing it. Turn off your antivirus or silent mode while you're installing Sage. And then you would run your data upgrades overnight, okay? So be mindful of that. when you guys are installing the year-end software release, that there's a data file upgrade associated with that. So plan accordingly, give yourself some time, because when you start this process, people cannot be using the software. You don't want to be in the middle of trying to upgrade a data file and somebody suddenly accesses that file. For instance, the AP master file. Okay? All right. We've already walked through installing your prior year tax, installing your payroll tax updates. Now, one thing you want to be aware of, once I've installed that tax update for 2024, I need to be cognizant of the fact that there may come a point where I have to make a prior year check adjustment. Okay, this is in January. What if an employee didn't cash his check at the end of December if I'm still printing checks for my employees? Okay, now I've gotten, or he's lost it and I got to recalculate, or things like that. Okay, or fixing bad checks in post. If you're trying to do something for a 2023 check and I've already updated to the 2024 taxes, you're going to need to walk through this process. Prior to fixing those 2023 checks, you need to restore your old tax file so it has the old rates. There's a KB article about doing that. Fix your bad checks. You run a recalculate subject to prior year task. Now that task is found here in payroll under this tools, recalculate subject to. Okay. And it's going to say, well, which year are you trying to recalculate it for? Prior year or current year, depending on where I'm at in my close year process in payroll. Okay. You would check this box, clear taxable and subject to period totals, and it'll go through and it recalculates everything based on the checks for the year and re-updates all those totals on the employee record so that now I have correct W-2 amounts. And that's, again, this is a process if I have to fix any checks that were for the prior year after I've installed my 2024 tax update. Okay? All right. Again, a reminder, download tax rates, update any manually, your state and employment, state employer tax items, not employee, but employer. All right. Now, when it comes to printing our W-2s and W-3s, we do everything online through an application called Atrix. For those of you who've been using Sage for a while, you'll know where that is. If this is the first time you're using Sage to do your W-2s and 1099s, you will find all of that under your tasks, federal e-file, and reporting. So when I launch this, this is actually launching what's called Atrix. It's a third-party company that handles all of our government filings for payroll from Sage. Okay. They also work off of multiple platforms, so they're not just a single vendor for Sage. They're widely used throughout the industry. So I pick my forms that I'm going to do right now. Notice I say, okay, which tax year am I trying to process this for? I've got my payroll at 2023. I go next. Got all my employees. Next. Generate. Now, one thing to be aware of, if you've never used the Atrix before, periodically, whenever you tell it to run that task, you may be prompted that there's new updates. You'll want to say, yes, I want to install those. There's the option that says automatic updates. You'll click that option and let it walk through and update all the forms so that you're current and accurate with them. Now, while that's thinking, okay, one of the things that you want to know is, do I need to print on perforated paper? Or can I print on plain W-2? There's a KB article discussing that. What forms to order? Typically, are the 4-up forms, perforated, Okay. And then again, this is where you can order them from. If you're not sure the number of W forms you need, okay, you can always run this report under payroll reports, tax preparation, W-2 count. That report is found here. Your W-2 count. All right. Back here on my Atrix, let me drag this over for you. Okay. If I said start, and I'm going to leave this here for a second because it's going to come up with this question here, and we're going to come back to this in 1 second. So here's my W-2 count, or I could say year to date. If I want to pick which state I want to run, if I have multiple states, that way I can also determine, so I've got federal and state W-2s that I may need to be generating. So if you are more than one state, go ahead and select your states. Reporting year, okay. If I haven't closed my year yet in payroll and I'm still in 2023, I would run this for year to date. Okay. If I've already closed my 2023 and and I'm now in 2024 and I'm ready to figure out how many W-2s I need for 2023, I'm going to say prior year. And if you read this little dialog box, it tells you exactly what to put in, year to date or prior year. Okay. So this will tell you how many W-2s you need. Okay. So printing my W-2s and W-3s. Started my ethics wizard, selected federal e-filing and importing. I've already installed my updates. I said I wanted to do my W-2s and W-3s. Came up with a list of my employees. I could uncheck any of them that I didn't need to do. Okay. Now, this is a question. You can combine multiple payroll data files for W-2s. Okay. Here's where that question comes into play. See what I'm doing this? Okay. Do I have only one single set of master files to use? Then I'm going to say no, I use a single payroll data file. But if I say yes, now I'm going to be pulling information from multiple data files into my Atrix for one combined reporting. So for those of you who have separated your payroll between field payroll and executive payroll or office payroll, so maybe you have two different payroll master files, okay? Everybody works for the same employer, but you separated it for confidentiality. You can combine them into one reporting, and it's necessary because you need everybody reported under the one FEIN. So this is where you're going to select that option. Yes, I use multiple payroll data files, and it's going to go through a wizard where I start bringing in those different payroll master files into one area for my W-2s and W-3s. Okay? All right. Okay. That is processing for our W-2s and W-3s. It's going to walk through your wizard. Okay, I'm filing for my company employer, and then any state forms, so on and so forth. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of here. Okay. And we're going to move on to the next thing, the Affordable Care Act. First of all, who needs to file for Affordable Care Act? Well, if I go back to my websites here, the Sage Affordable Care Act, okay, who needs to file? Okay. How do I report them? How do I generate them? Okay. How is a large employer determined? So there's different topics on here that determines whether or not you actually need to file. What are the Section 498H safe harbor codes for the Affordable Care Act? Okay. Self-insured or self-funded. Okay. What information actually prints on here? And what forms do I need to order for? Okay. All right. So when we're talking about our Affordable Care Act, we need to make sure that Sage is set up to track all that. And then we'll use Atrix to generate our W-2 and ACA forms. So when I'm working with my Affordable Care Act in payroll, Under this task, notice that you have this ACA compliance. And this ACA compliance is going to go out and it's going to be pulling information from the employee master file. And here's all of my employees. Okay, this is for 2023. All right, I've got a count of 50 of these. Okay, these qualify. If I need to adjust any individual, supposing they didn't work for a period of time, I can click on this detail and I'm going to come up with a grid for that employee and I'm going to say, you know what, they didn't work a couple months. Notice that as I changed one of them, it changes everything to the right. And now I'm going to come back and say, yep, they came back to work full time in June. So notice how July, August, September, October resets to full time. Okay? So this is how I can edit individual employees. Notice that up here now in his grid, full time, full time, full time, not working, full time. Okay. There's additional things in here when I'm looking at this detail. If I'm self-insured, this is where I'm going to put in all the number of covered and name of covered individual. Okay, employee is enrolled in an employer-sponsored self-insured healthcare plan. Here's where all the dependents are listed. Right. Safe harbor codes and offer of coverage. Okay, notice we've got these codes. If I go back to my help topic over here, okay, what are these safe harbor codes for the Affordable Care Act? And it's going to take me right to the website for me to look for what those are. Okay. All right. So once I have worked with this, now a couple things about this. You see this button called Use Daily Distributions. If you are tracking payroll entries by day, okay, on Monday they worked on this job, on Tuesday it was this job, on Wednesday it was this, and 8 hours and whatever, okay? So if you're doing what we call daily time entries, you can actually use this button called Use Daily Distributions. And what Sage will do is it'll go back out and it'll calculate by month for each employee how many hours they actually work. This is just a default. If an employee is full-time, you don't have to put in their actual hours. He may have worked 180 hours. I don't have to put that in there. All I have to do is track that they're full-time, okay? But if you want the system to go through and do all this calculation for you, to see if some of them actually were part-time or fell below a threshold or didn't even work at all, you can use this daily distributions button and Sage will calculate those for you. In order to do that, you need to make sure of a couple of setup features here within payroll that you have to have in place for that to happen. You need to make sure that any pays that are considered working hour pays, you need to make sure this is checked, include in ACA hours. By enabling that, that says, okay, when you tell it to go do daily distributions, I'm looking for all regular pay and I'm adding up the hours. So I'm obviously going to do that for regular. I'm going to be doing it for my overtime pays. Okay. And then I may be doing it for additional pay IDs. Okay. And you'd have to look up some IRS guidelines and things like that, but I may need to track sick time, PTO, holiday, if I'm tracking that. Okay, so if I've got a pay ID out there for holiday pay, PTO, vacation. So if those hours need to be part of that calculation, you would want to make sure you say include in ACA hours. That's going to enable that use daily distributions feature to update all the hours each month for all the employees in that grid. And then it will automatically change them if they're at a threshold. If they fall below, I'm not sure what it is, 30 hours for the month, it considers them part-time or exempt or something. But it will change those statuses. Okay. All right. Now, when I am dealing with payroll, okay, there's a timing. When do I actually need to close the year in payroll? And we'll get into this a little bit more when we're going through our closing order. But payroll, you always need to make sure that you are in 2024 before you process your first check for 2024. Right now, I'm in December of 2023. Okay. In order for me to do my first check of 2024, I need to close that year prior to my first check for 2024. This is going to clear out all my year-to-date accumulators, okay, and reset them all to zero. So your year-to-date taxes, your subject to, gross wages, all of that's going to get reset to zero when I run this close year. Okay. All right. Now, there's a couple of things that happens with, I believe I walked through on the tools to recalculate subject to. Okay, we've downloaded our taxes, and then we walked through our different features here within our ACA compliance before e-filing and reporting. Now let's go ahead and move on, and let's talk about what we're going to do with accounts payable. So printing 1099 and 1098s are going to be done in accounts payable, and accounts payable has the same thing similar to what payroll does. You're going to find that under your tasks, government e-file and reporting, form 1099. Okay. So this is just walking you through, verify appropriate vendors, have vendor receives form 1099, marked and set up vendors. We're going to walk through some of the things you need to make sure are in place for your 1099s in AP. So the first thing we want to look at, well, so when I'm actually running this, if I have set this, if I have multiple GL companies in my database, which means I'm getting a vendor paid by more than one federal entity, GL federal entity, okay, I have an option of how I generate my 1099s. Is it the total amount paid to the vendor by all companies, or is it by fiscal entity? So if I've got multiple GL companies, I'm going to be selecting that, and then I pick which GL entity I'm running the 1099s for. So I'll have to make two passes in this case. One pass for 1099 Construction Inc. and another pass for General Construction. Okay. Picking my form, minimum reporting, so on and so forth. I'm not going to walk all the way through that wizard. So a couple things that need to be in place first. So the first thing is on my vendors. Am I set up to track 1099s for this vendor? So on my vendor setup 1099 settings, do they get one? Yes or no? Okay. So a couple things to note about this checkbox. Let's say I'm coming here and I'm looking at this one. I should have flagged this vendor as receiving a 1099. I forgot to do that. And I'm just now looking at it and saying they should have gotten one. Well, Sage is still populating everything down here for you for the year. Okay. Whether or not you initially selected this box is irrelevant. Sage tracks every payment as if it's 1099 reportable. All this does is says when you're ready to generate 1099s, only select the vendors that have that box checked. But as far as what we accumulate down here, all vendors get theirs accumulated, whether or not this is checked. So you don't have to panic and say, wow, I forgot to do that on all my vendors this year. Guess what? All you have to do is come here and make sure you check it prior to printing your 1099s. We've already been accumulating your totals. Okay. The next thing is on your 1099 settings on the vendor setup, If you are sending out or you're not sure and they need to get one, okay, and you've tried to get a hold of them on multiple occasions to request their taxpayer identification number and they have not responded, by checking this box on here, when you actually generate your 1099, it puts a little check mark on there that says, hey, you've made multiple attempts to get their federal ID. So if I don't have their recipient's tax ID number, I won't get dinged by the IRS if I have that check. I've done everything I can to get their tax ID number. Okay. So that's what that second 10 notice, if they have never responded and I don't have their tax ID. All right. For those of you who are new to this, if you have any DBAs, any subcontractors that are DBAs, okay, the name of your vendor up here may be the DBA name. The recipient's tax ID would be the actual person's name. For instance, I'm an independent consultant, so I file as a 1099. Okay? My recipient's tax ID name would be Gregory Lane. My DBA may be Gregory Lane Consulting. Okay? So if you're a self-employed, sole proprietor, subcontractor you're working with, that's typically the DBA, but this is the actual tax ID name associated with that Social Security number. Okay? Down here, you're also specifying what type of form they get. Okay. Now, if you have a vendor or a person that gets more than one form, in Sage, that means you have to set them up as two separate vendors. And you need to make sure you record the right invoices to the right vendor. That's only if they have more than one form type for that particular person. If this vendor happens to be an attorney that you generated 1099 for, you have this check mark, gross proceeds paid to an attorney. Okay, that puts their numbers down into its own separate box. Okay. Now, if you notice in here, you've got 1099 amount paid this year, 1099 amount paid last year. Yeah. So in preparation for doing my 1099s, I need to look at what my AP settings are. Notice you have 2 years here in two different year fields in your AP settings. You have what we would call your calendar year or fiscal year end, and your 1099 year ending date. Okay? If that does not say 2023, if it says 2022, I better get this closed before I do anything for 2024. Okay? Notice Sage keeps track on that vendor this year, last year, next year. Okay? It's all predicated on what that year end is when I'm entering and paying invoices. So if I go back to my setup on my vendor, this year is representing 2023. Last year is representing 2022. Okay? If I started entering invoices right now and giving them a January check date, that will be represented in the next year bucket. Okay? So you want to be aware of that. Make sure that these are up to date. Okay? If you happen to have fallen behind on these dates, for whatever reason, you forgot to close last year and you didn't close the year before, so now you're out of sequence, you're too far back, okay? Well, now I've got a little bit of homework I've got to do. My buckets may not represent the right amount for the new year that I'm doing. If that is the case, Sage has a couple of tools in here that will help you with that. One of them is to recalculate 1099 totals. So if I find out that I've been sitting here, for instance, if this had been sitting at 2022, I'm going to say, oh man, I really need to get this up to speed, and maybe my buckets aren't correctly, so I'm going to do my close years and get it up to the right year ending date. But then I'm also going to run this tools to recalculate 1099 totals. That's going to go back and look at your checks for the year and put them in the right bucket for it. Does it belong in this year, next year, or last year? Okay, so all is not lost. In addition to that, there's a way that you can actually override some totals at the vendor level by using this tools maintain prefix totals. Okay. Now, since I am doing this by company, I need to look at, for company 10, here's my vendor 100, okay? Maybe that amount down here is incorrect, okay? So this is where I can override it. So I'm not doing anything with checks or anything. I'm overriding what I'm going to report for 1099 purposes. I can do it here. When I launch Atrix, this is what it's reading. It's reading our vendor buckets, deciding what puts in there. So this is where I can override those. Okay. So follow the wizard. You add your states as needed. Make sure you fill in the applicable boxes. Okay. Which ones am I doing? Okay. All right. So going back, do I or when do I need to close the year in AP? All right. So we looked at our settings. Okay. We looked at how that affects our 1099 amounts paid. So if my year ending is set at 12/31/2023, do I need to close that AP year prior to doing my 1099s? I do not. Okay. Remember, it's going to give me an option. Do you want to do your current year or last year? If I've already closed my year, then I'm going to say, hey, I want to print my 1099s for last year, 2023. Okay. So as long as you're sitting at 2023, I'm free to print my 1099s prior to closing my AP year or after I close my AP year. It's irrelevant. You just need to pick the right option, which bucket you want to print from when you're doing your 1099s, current year or the prior year. Okay. So there's different scenarios that you might want to run through. Okay. If my 1099 year is 2022, guess what I need to do? Close my 1099 year before printing 1099s and before printing 2024 checks. Okay. Then close my 1099 year again to get to year end 12/31/2024. Scenario number 2, if my 1099 year is 2023, then I can print 1099s before or after I close the 1099 year. Just pick the correct year when printing. Okay. You can print 2020 checks before or after you close your year, depending on your current year end. Okay. If scenario 3, you've closed your year. So now your 1099 year is 2024. Great. Print 1099s and 2024 checks anytime. Okay. You won't need to close your year for 1099 year again until late 2024 or early 2025. So I'm going to do these tasks over here in accounts payable. I'm going to go to tasks and I'm going to say, notice I have close year and I have close 1099 year, 2 separate closes. One of them advances, the close year advances this year ending date. The close 1099 year advances this year ending date. The effect on the employee, on the vendor. Okay. Your 1099 year affects these buckets. Your year ending date affects these buckets. Year to date purchases, this year, last year, next year. How much was paid this year, last year, next year. Okay, 2 separate buckets. They're affected by the 2 different closes. So if I go to my tasks and I say close 1099 year, notice it says your current year is 2023, new year ending 2024. I'm going to hit start. And depending on the number of vendors, okay, that could be very quick or it could take a couple of minutes. I go back to File, Company Settings, AP Settings. Notice that my new year ending date is 12/31/2024. If I look at the setup of my vendor that we have been looking at, and I look at 1099 settings, now notice what used to be in this year's bucket is now part of last year's bucket. Okay. If I do this tasks, close year, and I go back and I look at my setup of my vendors, notice that close year didn't do anything to this. It affected these buckets. What was in this year now becomes last year. Okay. So those are some different scenarios there. Okay. You can always post 12 months ahead of your current UAP year. Okay. We've talked about combining multiple files. Okay, here's different articles. Okay. How to allow for electronic 1099s. Again, these are all KB articles that you can look up on Sage's knowledge base. Now, let's prepare for year-end closings. So we've talked about our forms. Now let's talk about our year-end closings. Okay, what process do we go through? Is there an order? Is there a sequence that we're required to do this in? So here's some rules of thumb. So first of all, we always want to make sure we've cut our final year for payroll and AP checks, make any adjustments and corrections we need to. Obviously, making sure those final checks are done for the year, making sure that we have all adjustments and corrections done will affect your 1099s and your W-2s. Okay. Now, as far as the other applications, well, we're running different aging reports. We want to reconcile our subsidiary ledgers to our general ledger. We're going to make sure we go into each application, run a post in all modules, review any reports for unposted transactions, fix those issues, and make sure you have nothing sitting in your suspense account in general ledger. All right, so closing procedures in order, okay? First of all, each application has different closing processes. If I go back to my Sage desktop, okay. Notice under AP, okay, you do not have a close month process, you have close year processes. Okay. Same thing with AR. If I look at tasks, you have a close year process, no close month process. Okay. Cash management only has a close year month process, no close month processes. You're going to get into other applications, job costs. Everybody should be familiar with that by now. Job costs has a close month process. Okay. Notice it doesn't have a close year, it just has a close month. Okay. Payroll. Guess what? Everybody's familiar with payroll. Payroll has two processes. One is to close a month during the year, and the other one is to do a close year. Okay. If my payroll month is sitting there at 12/31/12/2023, and I try and run a close month, the system actually is going to process me. It's going to say year at the end of the year. Okay. You need to run the close year routine instead of the close month. So you will be prompted with that. Okay. General ledger does the same thing. Okay. If you're trying to run a close month and it's your fiscal year end month, and it's going to say, hey, you need to run the close year, not the close month process. Okay. So different applications have different closing features for year end. Some have year end, some just have monthly close. Okay. So in my order, one other thing to note, each application's close has nothing to do with the other application. For instance, I can run my close years in accounts payable and bring myself up into 2024, and my general ledger can still be sitting at 2023. I can run my close month in job costs and advance it into January of 2024 and still have my general ledger sitting at 2023. Okay. So they are all independent to each other. They don't rely on each other. Okay. Obviously, in order to get the right numbers and the right totals in place for W-2s and 1099s, that tells me my order. I need to make sure that payroll, I've got the close year done prior to running the first check for 2024. Got to close that year. Okay. I don't have the luxury of waiting. I don't care whether GL is ready to go, job costs or anything else. Payroll, man, you get that last one done prior to the first check of the year. You got to run your close year to get into 2024. Okay. Property management and accounts payable. Okay. We need to make sure we've got the right year buckets or year-end dates in our settings. Okay. So that we're within at least a year. We can't be 2 years behind because we don't have those yearly buckets that far back. Okay. So I need to make sure that I've got the right year ends for both property management and accounts payable. That makes sure that our vendor payments and any property management, any interest payments to tenants, that those accumulator buckets are reflecting the proper amounts. Okay. Equipment costs, contracts, job costs, accounts receivable, cash management, they use a close year, and then you have your general ledger. So order of sequence is really your general ledger is the last thing I close at the end of the year. Okay. All the other applications, if I've got a close year, I'm going to close it. I'm not waiting for GL close year. I'm closing those years so I can roll accumulator buckets, open up the correct year so I get the right numbers totally. Okay. All right. Some common questions when we're talking about general ledger. Can I close the year even if all prior year adjustments are done? Yes, you can. One of the things that happens in your general ledger when you are running your close year is Sage is going to look to see if any prior year's adjustments have been found. Okay. So you might get a dialog box when I go to run my close year. It says, wait a minute, you made prior year's entries last year and you've never reclosed the fiscal year. Okay. So Sage is going to say prior year adjustments have been found. Prior year will be closed. Close the fiscal year. We'll have to rerun again to close the current year. You can close. So if I'm in December, okay, and I'm getting ready to get into January, do I need to wait to close my fiscal year before I start doing January, February, March activity? No. The second thing is do I even need to wait to close the period? And my answer would be no. Okay. You can always reopen your prior fiscal year, make your entries, and run that closed fiscal year. Okay. You can do that as many times in 2024 as you want, and reclose 2023 as many times as you need to make adjustment for that prior year. The reason why we want you to move into a current month in general ledger is for financial statements. I can't print future financial statements. I can only print current and rollback ones. So if I'm leaving my GL sitting there in December of 2023, and now it comes along and we're in March of 2024, guess what I have not been able to generate so far? A January statement, a February statement, and a March. Okay. However, if I've gone ahead and treated it just like any other month, I closed my year 2023. I rolled into January. I can print January financial statements. I close my month, roll into February. I close my month, roll into March. Now I come along and I need to make those prior year's adjustments. I'm going to reopen that prior period, 12/31/2023. And I'm going to, or now in my case, it's 2015, but I'm going to reopen the period that I want to make those adjustments for. Make my 2020, my year-end adjustments. Run my task, close fiscal year to zero out any P&L entries to your retained earnings. I can do that repeatedly over and over and over again. So I guess my point is I really don't recommend holding open your GL at the fiscal year ends just because you're waiting for year ends adjustments. stay current with your GL so you can get current financial statements. You can always redo the prior fiscal years and enter your prior fiscal year adjustments. All right. Payroll. Is there a proper order for close year, update taxes, install year inversions? Okay. Obviously, we need to close the year before I do my first check for 2024. That's a priority. Okay. I also need to update my taxes prior to my first check of 2024. But as far as installing my year-end version, I do not need to install that prior to running my first check for 2024. I only need the year-end version installed when I am ready to generate W-2s and 1099s. Okay? Can I process new year checks before closing? Absolutely no. Again, I need to close that year. I need to roll into 2024 before I even start the first check of 2024. Okay? Accounts receivable and accounts payable. Can I process changes for a prior year? Yes, you can. So even if my AP is saying that my years are 2024, there's nothing preventing me from entering an invoice for 2023 and cutting a check for 2023 if I want to. Okay? AP is going to let me go backwards. It'll let me go forwards. I just don't want to go too far forward from those years. I want to make sure those year ending dates are in alignment. Okay? Same with AR. Okay? I can always go backwards. Okay? I just have to be careful about how far in the future I go. Okay. Record and post all your entries for your fiscal year, fix any rejections. You're going to verify that all your suspense accounts have a zero balance. That's one thing you want to make sure, because when you close your year in GL, if I've got a suspense account without a balance, Sage doesn't do anything with that balance. It says, I don't know if this is a P&L account, if this is a balance sheet account, and that could really whack out your financial statements. So make sure that that suspense account has been zeroed out. Okay? Sage treats it specifically when I'm doing my close year. It doesn't touch it. So I could have some wrong numbers by the time I'm done doing that. All right. Print your trial balance and you have your month-end report. You're reconciling your other applications to GL. You're running an AP open invoices report. You're running an open receivables report. You're running maybe your job cost WIP reports. You're validating all those against your general ledger. You're printing your financial statements. We typically tell you to back up your database prior to running these closed fiscal years and closed months. Okay? All right. So some critical year-end tasks. Plan ahead. Make sure you guys get your forms ordered. Your 1099 forms, however many you need. Your W-2 forms. Okay? Those are if you're printing those. By the way, one of the things that features of Atrix is Atrix will prompt you as you're walking through the wizard, and they actually will do everything for you. They'll give you a pricing. They calculate it's a per vendor and it's a per employee price, and they'll do everything for you, and they give you the option of selecting what you want them to do. They will e-file your forms for you. They will send out the forms to the vendor. They'll provide electronic, or the employee, they'll provide a portal for the employee to retrieve it. They will also take care of it. They do it start to finish. You can pay them right then and there. They'll calculate the total. They say, hey, you got 50 employees at $2 an employee. It's $100 to do all of this. You pay them right then and there, and it's done. Okay. So you will have the option of either printing your own forms as you're walking through the Atrix wizard, or you'll have the option of having Atrix do everything electronically for you and file it. Okay. And it calculates that per charge right then and then. So you don't get a future invoice. It's right at that moment, they'll tell you how much it costs. You give them your credit card, and it's done. If you've got a lot of employees and a lot of vendors you need to send out, I personally would highly recommend it. I've had quite a few clients who have historically wanted to print their own W-2s and 1099s, and then they started realizing that it's very time consuming. They switched that, and they just said, it was so easy. I mean, it's really boom, 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 I'm done. Okay, off to the next accounting task. So you get that feature. Okay. All right. Now we're talking about a year-end release. Again, it's going to be version 23. There's a few highlights to it. I haven't seen anything that makes a whole lot of difference version 22 and 18. For instance, in payroll, they have done duplicate state and local tax descriptions, fixing an issue there. They've added the Washington paid family leave now includes exempt status info, compliance with EEOC. Generate direct deposits. I'm not sure what they've done on that because we've already been doing that for a long time. Same way with accounts payable. So I'm not sure why they're listing as a highlight here. I'd have to go through and see what that is. Inventory and item valuation reports. They've updated some reports there. Property management. They've got a new format for the 1099 IRS tax that's been in part of this new release. Service management, archive work orders. We've already had a wizard, but they've done enhancements there, and synchronizing our vendors, they've done some enhancements there. Okay. When it comes to others, we're looking at network, your environment or workstation environment. Windows 11, Windows Server 2022 are now supported. On your desktop, you can have an embedded browser upgrade, and system administrator initial replicator database setup no longer stalls. The replicator, that's for anybody that uses a Sage SQL replicator. At this point, Troy, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you may have a list of questions, and wanted to see if there's something that we can go on. If there's anybody who wants me to go back over a topic, we can cover that. But I'm going to turn this back over to you.
Oh, great. Here we go. Can you suggest an archival process for year-end we should follow?
I'm glad you guys brought that up. I'm going to share something with you on this desktop. And I basically have put together this archiving document that walks through application by application what we do, okay? This gets updated every year, by the way. So I may have a 2023 data archiving document. I'm going to update it for 2024. And what I'm really updating is I'm specifying what my cutoff date's here, okay? When I move things from current to history, things like that. As a rule of thumb, when we're doing our archiving, we will push everything into history files within your live database, okay? I don't know if some of you who have been on here a long time are in the habit of making a whole copy of your database at the year end, but that's really not necessary. That's just taking up a lot of space, okay? We really want to keep, for instance, like my AP. I'm not pushing that off over in some database. I'm just archiving my payments into a history file in my live database. I can access those through reports and inquiries anytime I want, but they're still within the live database, okay? So this document really kind of walks through that. I'm moving things into history, things like that. Now, there's a couple of exceptions that we make as far as databases. One is job cost, okay? We treat that one a little differently. What we recommend is that you have a separate database called closed jobs. And when you are archiving, you are actually moving closed jobs and all of their associated transactions from your live database to this closed jobs database, okay? By the way, don't do a separate closed jobs each year. It gets really confusing. One closed jobs database for all closed jobs life to date. When you do that closed jobs, you're basing it on a couple of criteria. One is, what's the status? Is it closed? Another criteria that I use, though, is when was the last cost transaction post updated? So let's say I'm ready to archive, and I say, you know what, I want to make sure all my 2022 jobs are archived. Anything closed prior to, from 2022 on backwards, I want to archive. Well, I may have flagged it as closed, but guess what? I may have thought it was closed in December, but we had some costs coming in 2023. So this last cost update would say, hey, if I haven't been paid, if I haven't had any costs since 12/31/2022, move it. But if I have had costs in 2023, even though the status is closed, don't move it, because that can have an impact on WIP reports. So there's different cutoffs we use for this. So job costs, we recommend a folder called closed jobs. That's where all of them reside. Payroll, we will typically recommend another database, and that's where you just move terminated employees. You don't move their checks. You just move a terminated employee over to this terminated employees database. The nice thing about doing that is, let's say you have rehires. I put my employee into a terminated database, and a year later they come back. I can then move them back. I can transfer them from that terminated employees database back to the live database, and they'll have all the demographics. So I have the way to bring back a rehire. Okay. And general ledger is another one that we actually will separate a separate year-end database. Okay. Typically, general ledger, the year-end database is for one reason and one reason only: financial statements. Okay. If you recall, in general ledger, I can only go back and get financial statements. I can get last year's financial statements. If I'm in 2023, I can get all of 2022 financial statements, but guess what I can't get? 2021. So what we do is, at the end of your year, is we make a year-end folder so that I can look at the prior 2-year financial statements. So I may create a year-end folder called 2022 GL. And I'm going to copy my master file into that. That's all I'm doing, copying my master file into that. I don't touch it. It's only so I can roll back, because once I close my year in GL and roll into 2024, I'll never be able to get those 2022 financial statements unless I've done that copy prior to the close. So those are the 3 areas where we recommend separate databases: a closed jobs database, terminated employees database, and then each year a fiscal year-end database that houses just the GL master file, and its sole purpose is to get the prior year's financial statements. Okay? Transactions still stay in the live database. Otherwise, in all the other applications, you're moving transactions into a history file based on cutoff dates. And I use this document that I worked together. Like I said, I've got clients, and we update it every year. So if I did 2023 for somebody else, then I'm going to say, now they're going to tell me, okay, now my next cutoff date when I'm getting ready to do this is I want you to do 12/31/2022. As a rule of thumb, when I'm archiving GL, I'm probably keeping my current fiscal year, 2023, okay? And then I'm going to be doing all of 2024. So I may keep 2 fiscal years worth of transactions in my current file. Otherwise, everything else is going to go into history. Okay. Cash management, that's pretty easy. I'm moving statements. Okay. I'm moving those into a history file, the register. I'm cleaning up that history GL file. If a check and a cash receipt has reconciled and cleared the bank and things like that, I really don't have a need to go back and void a check, do I? It's cleared the bank. Okay. So I'm okay with moving those in. Again, I try and be consistent with these. So if I'm doing 12/31/2022, I would say the same thing, 12/31/2022. Same thing, 12/31/2022. So you're going to be playing around with these dates. AP, we recommend you keep about 15 to 18 months worth of check and invoice data in your master file, in your current file. Anything prior to that, well, if it's paid, cleared the bank, things like that, move it to history. Okay. I kind of do the same thing with that, accounts receivable. Job costs, that's based on whether the job's still active or whether I got transactions for the job this month. Okay. Contracts, we need to move them from current to history. So again, I change my status to paid in full, and then I put a work completed on, and then that helps with the wizard. Okay. Payroll, I'm moving checks from current to history, moving them with the cutoff date. And then I'm moving terminated employees to a closed and terminated employees database. Okay. Troy, I'd be happy to make this available to anybody. It's one that I use for quite a few clients. It works pretty well. Obviously, you can tweak it with some things as far as, how you name close your databases, things like that.
Yeah, why don't you send me a copy of that, and we can get that out to anybody that requests it.
Did we answer the question?
Yeah, I know we have people reaching out, several that want to, let's see, they want the document. I'm just reading through one more.
So real quick,
I think job cost requires you to move to another file. You don't have an option. Is that correct?
No, you actually do. Nope, you do. You can move everything. So it just depends on what you're doing. So like in job cost, okay? Let's say I'm doing my job cost move. And I'm going to do move my jobs. Let me get you open. Come on.
Are there any other modules like that too?
Okay. Now, so here's where, as soon as it's done loading, come on. It shouldn't take this long. There we go. All right. So notice under my tools, I have my move jobs and transactions. So if I'm moving jobs, okay, this is where it's going to say, okay, where are you moving to? So this one is where I'm going to say, hey, I need to move to my closed jobs database. So I'd look in my drop-down box and I would see my data folder for closed jobs, and I'd go there and say, that's where I need to move them to, okay? When it comes to the transactions, it depends on how you're doing your transactions. If I do this tools, move, transactions, and I say current to history, notice it's just saying, hey, I'm going to take them out of the current file and I'm going to put them in the history file, but I'm going to leave it in this database. Okay, so it doesn't give you an option of moving to a different folder. However, if I do it this way, if I say tools, move, transactions, and instead of going current to history, I go current to current, notice what my dialog box is going to say. It says, let me drag it over. It's going to say, okay, destination file. Where is that? That's where I'm going to say, oh, where I want to move it to is my closed jobs database into a file called current. Okay. So if I go current to current, it'll prompt me for a location. If I go current to history, it won't. Okay.
Okay.
Now,
those of you that ask questions on that, if you need more clarity, let me know. Keep going, Greg.
Yeah. There is one thing. We can get around all of that. Okay. And this gets into a little bit more advanced feature, but by doing what's called named files. So file locations. If I now come around and I say, I'm turning on what's called the named JC transaction files. And now I say tools, move, transactions, current to history. Now it's asking me, the first thing is okay, you got to read your dialog box. Okay, what's the source file? Well, the source file is my current file. Okay. Then the next dialog box that pops up, it says, okay, what's the destination file? And now I can pick my closed jobs database and give it whatever name I want. Okay. So we have options there. Now, going back and talking about our archiving process, we really do want to practice data archiving. It makes your system run smoother. One, we're looking at your current files with less information, so your reports, your inquiries. You go to select invoices, pay, and AP. If you've never archived, well, once you've archived, you're going to see that process runs faster. You go into cash management, you go into your edit register. If you've never archived that, man, you got all kinds of data to scroll through to find it. Okay, or to get to a bottom. But if you start archiving, that list that you see in that edit register is a whole lot cleaner with more current and accurate and up-to-date information. Okay, so It helps your system perform better, reports, inquiries. We also run what's called a file doctor during that time. And what a file doctor will do is it'll go back and it'll compact your files and it'll try and it'll look for any errors and try and fix them that it finds. It usually finds things with funky descriptions that have got weird characters, and it'll give you a warning message that's saying, hey, I found an unprintable character in your descriptions. It won't do anything with that. It says it's just a warning. Other places it'll say, hey, this field is out of whack, and it's going to reset it to a default value. So there are some routines that File Doctor does to make sure that your files are all in good and operable condition. That's part of all of that archiving. One other thing with the data archiving is the log viewer, the log file that you find in your Sage desktop. And if you've never archived this, you really should, because this log viewer, if it gets too big, I don't know if any of you have ever looked at that, but this log viewer grows exponentially, especially if you're using Sage Paperless or TimberScan or something like that, HH2, it's constantly pinging this. Man, if that file gets too big, it can actually start causing some data corruption. Okay, so that's one of the other things we do when we do our yearly archiving is we clean out that log viewer, reset it, and let it start from zero. So all those things will help improve the performance of your software. It's just good data governance to do this.
Awesome. Okay, a couple more questions that came in. I'm assuming we can do a consult with you. Yes. Anybody that wants to reach out to Greg, you're welcome to reach out to him. He's happy to hop on and look under the hood. You're also welcome to reach out to Digitech, and we can coordinate that call.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then how do you move an employee from terminated file in history to active?
Okay. So good question. So notice when I did that, I'm doing this tools right in here. I'm saying move employees. Okay. All I have to do is be in that terminated database. So I'm going to go to File, Open Company, and I'm going to go to my terminated database. And I'm going to launch that wizard, okay? Let's see if I have anybody that I could look at without getting into trouble here. I may not have payroll in here. Oh, we did. But if I go to this tools, move employees, so I would want to be in my terminated database when I'm launching this, and I go move employees. And now it's going to prompt me. It's going to say, where do you want to move them to? Yeah, I didn't think I had one in here. It would prompt me and say, where do I want to move them to? And that's where I pick my live database. And then I'm just going to use ranges and conditions at that point. Let me open up the construction one. When I'm moving them out of my live database, so this is going to say, okay, where do I want to move them to? Great. So let's say I pick data, and I'm going to go over here to my Gold Coast group. Notice I have that check mark, move only terminate employees. And I might do conditions where I say, okay, they were terminated in 2022, move them. When I want to bring them back, I'm going to be in that terminated database, and I'm going to select my live database when it prompts me. But this time, I'm going to uncheck this box, and I'm just going to use ranges to pick which employee I want to move back, or employees. Okay, and that's it. It's the same tool. It's the same task. Okay, just depends on which database I'm starting from. You can do the same thing with your jobs. When I move jobs into a closed database, if I need to be into that closed jobs database, I can move them back. All I have to do is be in that closed jobs database when I run that tool. It'll prompt me. It says, okay, where do you want to move them to? Great. I'm going to pick my live database to move it back into there. Okay, so we move them back and forth between these databases as necessary.
Okay, awesome. Looks like that's it. Quite a few of you that have migrated over to the subscription platform. There's a handful still that haven't, and I think some of it's trepidation. I just want to clarify, there's no difference in the software between subscription and your current perpetual if you haven't made that migration change. The pricing is the only difference. You get better pricing if you buy new modules. That pricing is about 1/3 the cost. And then whether you're on silver or gold, perpetual, you automatically move to gold plus in the subscription platform. That's just included with that. It is a special pricing for legacy customers. New customers don't get the same pricing. I just want you to be aware of that. I'm happy to make that move for you. The ideal time, obviously, is when your support is to be renewed. But if you go to buy new licenses, we can do it at that time also, and Sage gives you credit for unused support and things like that. So it usually works out well to your advantage. If you have any questions about that, please reach out to me, and I'm happy to have that conversation with you. For everybody else, thank you for your attendance. Appreciate your time. Greg, thank you. And I invite you to reach out to Greg if you have any additional questions. Of course, you can reach out to me and contact Digitech in general, and our team will direct you in the right direction. So thanks again for your attendance. Appreciate it. Everybody have a great day.
Thank you.